Welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. Let's talk money.
Welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. I'm Glenn Craig of Free From Broke, and I am your moderator tonight. Here are the minds that make up the Money Mastermind Show. We have Miranda Marquit from Planting Money Seeds, Peter Anderson of Bible Money Matters, Tom Drake of Canadian Finance Blog, and Kyle Prevost of youngandthrifty.ca. We also have a special guest tonight, Roger Whitney, the retirement answer man. Welcome to our show, Roger.
Hey, how are you doing?
We are good. How are you?
I'm awesome.
So, I mean, you look at where Roger's from. He's the retirement answer man. So you might be able to guess part of the subject of what we have tonight. The topic is, how much do you need to retire? Before we go into any more, I just want to let anybody know that's watching live, if you are on our Hangout page, there is a Q&A app. So if you have any questions regarding what you need to retire, please ask them, and we will try to get them onto the show. So retirement. Let me shoot a couple things out here. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, less than half of Americans have figured out how much money they need for retirement. In 2012, 30% of workers in the private sector aren't taking part in their defined contribution plan. That's something like a 401k. And that's for companies that have a plan like that. On top of that, Americans will spend about 20 years in retirement. And those are some eye-opening stats. So let's start out with the big softball question. Roger, you're our guest here. How much do we need in retirement?
I have no clue. Here's the short answer. And I think people think about retirement in the wrong ways, in the old way. So I used to teach part of the certified financial planning curriculum, and I taught retirement planning and employee benefits. And if you look at the retirement planning process that is the best practice in the industry, basically it makes you determine what your savings gap is, right? How big of a nest egg you need to have when you retire to support your standard of living. And then it looks at your current assets and it says, here's your gap. So this is how much you need to save between now and then. And that type of process works if your life expectancy is, say, 10 to 15 years in retirement, maybe. But for people under 40, especially, who are going to live probably 30 years plus after age 60, that doesn't work. So what ends up happening is that savings gap gets to be so huge that, you look at it, there's no way I can do it. So then you just forget about it because you think it's going to be impossible. And I think there are a lot more creative ways to think about it than that old process. And I think that's part of the problem that deters people from even thinking it's possible.
Yeah. Go ahead, Miranda.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, when you look at the Employee Benefits Research Institute, points out that 6 in 10 American workers have less than $25,000 saved up for their retirement. And I think looking at that gap, as Roger was saying, can just be very daunting. You look, oh, well, I've got less than $25,000 saved up. But, and then you read the media and you see what they're saying, and they're like, oh, you're going to need $2 million. $1 million is gone now. Nobody's saying that anymore, So they're like, you're going to need $2 million to retire, and you're looking at your $25,000 and you're going, I'm never going to make it, and it's hopeless. And it's easy to just kind of succumb to that, I think.
And I think on top of that, I mean, just generally saving for retirement, it's almost this phantom money. You're putting this money away for so long in the future that a lot of people just don't want to do it. People will say, do I even know I'm going to retire? Why should I scrimp and save for so long for something that, I'm going to struggle now for that thing that's so far off. So people don't do it, and that kind of makes the whole situation a little bit worse.
Well, if you think about it, we're all dealing with the same problem, and it doesn't really matter what age you are. I'm 47. Doesn't matter if you're 47, 57, or 27. we're all trying to live as well as we can today without sacrificing tomorrow.
Right.
And the traditional retirement planning process focuses on sacrifice. It's two solutions basically are either sacrifice more lifestyle now to save more, or prepare to live with less. And that's a very narrow way of thinking about it. And I think there's a lot, especially the younger generations, I think see it a little bit more, that there's a better solution to that. Is for one example, and I have a client who is my age, 40, well, he's 48. And over the last 10 years, we have planned on him taking off, literally quitting his job every 4 to 5 years and taking a year off. And and we structure his entire financial life to do it that way, with the understanding that he is going to work until he's 70 to 75 in some capacity. So if we get out of this, well, this is how much I need by the time I'm 60, and start to think, well, look, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to want to be engaged, but I'm going to want to work on my own terms. So if I'm 27 and I accept that I'm going to be a productive person up until, say, age 70 or 75, if you recognize that early, just think about what that does to that savings gap. All of a sudden, you don't need to save as much of a nest egg because you're going to have productive income coming in for a lot longer period of time. And that's going to buy you a lot more balance in your life than the traditional ways do of, hey, you need to build up this $2 million number that Miranda talked about.
Right.
So would you say...
We always step on each other.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and the point you're making here is, as far as all these variables when it comes to retirement saving, that really is what makes planning for retirement so individual for people. You need to figure out, when are you going to start saving? Are you starting to save earlier? What age are you going to retire? Are you going to retire at all? What type of salary growth are you going to see over time? How long are you going to live in retirement? What's your health like? There's so many different variables that play into it too. So it really is kind of an individual thing where you really need to sit down and think out a plan for yourself.
And it doesn't just focus on savings. It focuses on what are some different ways of generating income outside of the traditional employment model. I don't have the statistic here, but it's pretty drastic. And I think it was in 2013, the vast majority of people are going to be contract type workers. They're going to be freelancers. Maybe, I don't know if it was that high, but it was a pretty high number. So if you start to think of it in those terms, then it's not just simply a savings gap problem of I need to sacrifice more lifestyle to throw more money into my investment accounts. And I'm not saying you don't do that, but you can think a lot more creatively on your lifestyle management. Do you need the McMansion? Do you need to buy the new cars and all those things that I've heard people talk about? I think you had a drastic savings episode. I think it was the last episode, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have that aspect of it, but you also have, how can I create different flows of income, whether it's through blogging or rental income or whatever it happens to be. You can be a lot more creative than just simply save, which is the financial industry's solution.
So the age-old 4% rule, that's not really something we should be thinking about so much anymore, is it?
Well, the way I would look at the 4% rule, it's like a rule of thumb, right? There's some truth to it, but there's a lot of nuances that don't get addressed with it. I think the 4% rule is a good rule of thumb when you want to have a general idea of, okay, if I have X amount of assets, say $1 million in assets, if I take a 4% withdrawal rate at age 60, will I run out of money? And there's a lot of assumptions built into the answer to that, but more than likely you'll be able to maintain an inflation-adjusted lifestyle with a 4% withdrawal ratio, with a lot of caveats built underneath that. So as a rule of thumb, it's still a decent yardstick to use when you're thinking about what kind of income can I sustain with a portfolio for a long period of time.
Okay. So with all that, obviously we got to look into where we're generating income and different ways to generate income, and we have to look at the lifestyle that we want. So for the person listening, how do we go about calculating where we might want to start saving? Like, where are the places we have to look at, and how much can we get a ballpark figure on?
In terms of that end number?
Maybe, or like how should we start thinking about it? Because it is kind of something that's far off, and
so it goes back to age. So if we're talking this is obviously all my opinion, but if we're talking people under 40, well, I'm 47, and this is how I do it for myself, is it's not an investment solution or problem. It's a business issue, right? So how do you do it? You want to manage your balance sheet rather than if you're 25 or even 35, trying to figure out how much you need to have when you're 65 is pretty worthless exercise. I mean, it's nice intellectually, but life is going to change so much, and your priorities are going to change, and your life circumstances are going to change so much that it's like writing a major business plan in B school. You're going to print out this huge report. You're going to have all these assumptions built in, and pretty much as soon as you print it, it's all worthless after that. It's a great exercise, I guess, but it doesn't really give you actionable things you can do. My suggestion would be is just like a business. Focus, number one, on cash flow. How do you create free cash flow in your life? And just like a business, it's okay, what income do I have coming in? And what are the sources of income? And what can I do to influence those sources of income? Whether it's job training, education, busting your butt at work, changing jobs. So how do you increase your cash flow? That's always an issue. And then how do you control expenses? Because the goal with the business, just like you as a person, is how do I create free cash flow? And then that free cash flow, and I think this is some of the stuff you guys talk about, that's your excess income that you can save or do something with. And so that's number one, is really focus in on how do you control both ends of cash flow, whether it's your income and increasing that, and the expense side of the balance sheet, or the expense side of the cash flow statement as well. That's number one. And you guys teach a lot about that stuff and talk about a lot of that stuff on your blogs. And then number two, rather than calculate some long number that's 30 years off for a goal that you put down on paper because you have to pick an age and you have to pick an income level that you think you're going to need, rather than do that, focus on managing your balance sheet. So look at this, the number one document I use with clients is their net worth statement. That's where we spend 90% of our conversation of, okay, what are your liquid assets? What are your taxable assets? What are your tax-free assets? What are your fixed assets like houses and things like that? And then we look at the debt side of it. And then it's the best thing that anybody can do is then make lots of little smart decisions. And while you're balancing living well today, and then whatever you create from all those little smart decisions will determine what your lifestyle will be. I think if you approach it from figuring out the end and try to work backwards, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, Tom, does retirement date and income requirement mean anything to you?
No, I've mentioned before that I save money up, but I haven't really come up with a plan as to what amount I'm saving for or anything like that. I put money in my RSP here, and I don't really focus on I need this amount by whatever age, because I don't even know what age I want to retire at this point.
Yeah. And the problem with setting those kind of retirement goals is that then, if you're an A-type personality to set a goal anyway, then you feel like you have to hit that goal. And a year from now, that goal may mean absolutely nothing to you because you care more about home time than you do work time. I know I've gone through those different seasons in my life. So I think if you focus on the balance sheet end of it and making lots of little smart decisions, so in terms of goal planning, I always say get your 1-year goals down of what's coming up in the next year that you have to account for. Then what's your 3-year timeline of where you want to be in life, and then what's your 5-year. And I think if you're 40 or under, especially, I wouldn't worry about beyond that. And the idea is to build up your entire financial picture to sustain some type of lifestyle. And you're meander your way there, assuming you have a good framework to do it.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear Roger sort of talk from that mindset and focus on, simple things like cash flow and, making small improvements to your net worth statement, because I think so often we get these $1 million or $2 million, or you're going to need, 80% of your income, current income in retirement. And these statistics are so generated by sort of people with vested interests, and oftentimes by the investment industry. So I'm really glad to hear, if your investment advisor is not telling you what Roger's telling you, get a new investment advisor. Because if they're telling you, forget the debt, forget all this other stuff, you need $2 million, you need to start saving with me. Oh, and by the way we're going to save is with these super high fee mutual funds. Of course, they won't call them that. They'll call them 5-star mutual funds. But if that's how they're going to do it, then just leave the room immediately. Get a new financial advisor, because they're not helping you, and they're just using the same old garbage that people have used to actually steal money from people's retirement funds for decades now.
And Kyle, you make a really good point. So maybe we can talk about professionals really quickly. And I have some strong opinions here. So I am a investment advisor. I'm a partner in a registered investment advisory firm. I've been doing this 23 years. I was a branch manager at a major brokerage firm. I worked at the largest private bank in the world, and they're all good people. But I will tell you, the training programs, and this isn't a person issue. This isn't an integrity issue with the people that are offering advice. But from my vantage point and experience, advisors are trained as salespeople, and it's not their fault. But when I was at Payne Weber, and I went through their training program, and I went up to Weehawken, New Jersey, and I went through this training program. It was sales presentation and product knowledge, because asset management is where the revenue comes from. And even in my own business, that's where the revenue comes from. But my point is, if you look at most financial advisors, they don't even know what a balance sheet is, or how to read one, or how to manage a cash flow. They're not business people by training. They're investment advisors that know product knowledge and sales presentation. And that's not a knock against them personally. It's just that they're not trained to it. They're not trained. And then the CFP is one of those first steps to really getting a better holistic view of it. But it's still, all this has grown up from the financial services industry. So it's not like a doctor that goes on an apprenticeship and gets mentored into it. And a financial advisor gets licensed and then sells, and they live or die, and most of them die and they fade away. And the ones that live either maintain that sales lifestyle, or always trying to do the right thing for people. But then there are a very small amount, and this was sort of my path, was I was 8 to 10 years into it. I'm like, you know what? This sucks. I'm making good money, but I don't feel like I'm making a difference in the world. And I basically blew up my business and said, okay, now I know what my core competency is. So I need to recreate and build a business off of that. So I ended up taking a huge step back. And that's, I think, the path less traveled for most advisors once they make it. And doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just that they're not equipped with a lot of the knowledge to talk about balance sheets. And everything's an investment solution. And that's what
I just want to quickly point out, in Canada, you need absolutely zero credentials to call yourself a financial advisor. I can put a sign outside my window right now and call myself a financial advisor. It's not illegal. So take that for what it's worth.
Well, it's the same thing here, really. You can't be like a registered investment advisor. Like what Roger's talking about, you have to go through certain certifications. But if I wanted to, I could call myself like a financial coach or a financial planner or financial advisor. I wouldn't be certified by, a particular organization or have, specific credentials, but I could still call myself that.
Yeah. And I think you have to, it's like getting a mechanic. You want mechanics that are certified to work on your problems. But when it comes down to the day, you want the people that are active thinkers, that are business people more than investment people, and that embrace the fiduciary obligation. And that's a big buzzword with the regulatory bodies here in the U.S. I don't think clients know anything about it and understand it, but basically a fiduciary is someone that embraces the legal obligation to actually do what's in the client's best interest and hold themselves legally liable for it. That's a good start to finding somebody that is willing to be that steward to help shepherd you through this whole process.
So I think a big problem is the average person doesn't even want to think about retirement in the future. I mean, would you say that's somewhat the case? We don't want to put the money away and whatnot. So what, a person, you're saying it's a buzzword, the fiduciary. A couple of quick steps, like what should a person start to look for? What are the questions they should start to ask that they would understand of somebody that they should be looking for as an advisor if that's what they want to do?
Well, I would, and I have a checklist that I put together with questions that I give to people, and your referrals from friends are always good. And the way I explain it to people that I talk to is, it's a business relation. You want to have it be a business relationship. I mean, I don't play golf with clients, and when I go to clients, I have agendas. But I think some of the questions you should have are, you need to ask questions and shut up so you can let that person talk, because you're interviewing them. And the traditional first meetings with potential clients and advisors, usually the advisor's asking the questions and just getting into that profiling process. And I think the first meeting needs to be the opposite direction, which is, tell me what process you use with every client.
Sounds good.
That's simple. And I'll tell you, most advisors don't have a single process that is well thought out that they use with every single client. Number one, tell me your investment philosophy. Tell me the fees involved. Tell me your communication schedule. Tell me your ideal client. And let them tell you before they know anything about you. Because a lot of, if you are a senior executive with executive comp programs and RSUs and stock options, most advisors will say they know it, and that's a bad way to say it. Some advisors will say they know it, and then they'll go research it afterwards. You want somebody that's walked the path with other people that you're on, so they know where the pitfalls are. So I guess the key thing is, have a list of questions, and you Google them. I can give you my checklist, or you can Google them, and you can find a lot of really good questions to use. But go in there with your list of questions and interview 2 or 3, and hold them to their answers, and avoid letting them profile you on the front end.
That's a great point you raised, Roger, with the comparison. I always find it interesting that when people buy a vehicle, they'll look at like 3 or 4 dealerships. And yet when people are planning their retirement, which oftentimes is handling, hundreds of thousands or even maybe 7 figures worth of assets, they interview one person. Or it's like, oh yeah, my buddy from, three doors down, or that I met at college, I'm going with that person. Or whoever my big bank recommended to me, that's who I'm going to blindly trust with this 7 figures worth of assets. But my Toyota Corolla, I'm going to definitely compare that to what Hyundai has to offer. That just blows my mind that people don't sort of have this same objectivity there.
Yeah, and I think another good rule of thumb would be, and this is hard because, as a consumer, it's not anything that, most people don't understand financial products, or they don't even really want to. They want to live their life, right? So they don't want to get into the details. One good rule of thumb is, there shouldn't be any product or solution talk for 2 or 3 meetings. The solution, the actual tools that are being brought out of the box, whether it's whatever it is, an index fund, a mutual fund, whatever that is, that should be an afterthought to all the bigger issues of the balance sheet, cash flow, short-term, mid-term, long-term priorities, and that process. The tools are, although they're important on the investment end of it, aren't really that important. Because investments are only one line on your balance sheet. And that would be a big warning sign, is also, oh, I got this great annuity, or I have this great index strategy, or whatever it is. The sooner you start to hear a product, the more cautious I would be that they don't really have a consultative process. They have a sales process.
So that leads us into a question we have here from our audience member, J. David Stein. And he's asking, what are examples of these small balance sheet decisions that we should be making when we're looking at our finances? And
That's a great question. So let's assume you have $5,000 excess cash flow that you need to allocate on your balance sheet. So I'm a checklist guy, so I use checklists for everything. And So the way that conversation would work is, okay, cash reserves. So it always starts with cash reserves. You have your emergency fund, and that would be anywhere from 3 months to 2 years, depending on whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're retired, whether you have stable income, or have you. So first step would be, do you have your emergency fund funded? Check. Assuming you do. If you don't, that's where the $5,000 would go. If you do, then do you have funded your sinking fund for any extraordinary expenses you're going to have in the next 12 months? Because, good example, me, next 2 weeks from now, I'm taking my son to college for his freshman year. I've known that's coming up for the last 12 months. So I've worked my butt off to make sure that I had that tuition money set aside because I knew I was going to have to pay it. So you have emergency fund, then you have a sinking fund for any extraordinary expenses that you have coming out. If you already have that taken care of, check. Now you look at the debt side of your balance sheet. If you have all the bad debts that we all talk about, car loans, credit card loans, student loans, all the other things, then it may go there. You know, some of that has to do with individual situations. If it doesn't go to debt, then you go to tax deferred savings and you max those out, or the Roth if you're younger, meaning under 35. So you just go through a hierarchy of what do I do with that $5,000, and that is the same hierarchy that I would go through with. I'm like a wind-up down when it comes to those type of things. I would go through that same hierarchy on any kind of cash flow decision. But those are the kind of little decisions you can make on your balance sheet. And the really cool thing about doing that systematically is, and I have clients that I can go back 15 years with their net worth statement that will start at negative net worth, and now we're 10 years later and the net worth is substantially higher. Well, it's definitely in the green. And that's a better benchmark to use in terms of your financial progress and wondering what the markets are doing. Because that is your net worth statement is the sum of all those little decisions you make that are smart. Because if you get, I've had car fever I've been battling lately, and if you succumb to car fever too much, then that's going to show up on your balance sheet because you're always going to have a car loan or you're going to have an asset that's depreciating. So I think, does that answer your question on some of the little decisions that you can make?
That sounds pretty good to me. I mean, it's actually kind of surprising and refreshing to hear that you're taking a holistic approach and looking at your entire finances when we're talking about retirement, and that it's not just this thing that's an offshoot in the future, but that besides what you're saving, it's everything that you're doing now is going to affect you and has we could get fancy and call it an opportunity cost, but everything that you're spending now has an effect on what's going to happen later on, basically.
And the problem with, and I hate the term retirement, because the problem in defining it as saving for retirement or how much do I need for retirement, that defines the whole problem as a destination or that you have to march to and achieve, right? It's like you're climbing up this huge mountain and you're saving this huge mountain of a war chest to get to retirement. Well, what the heck happens then? Especially with the way our longevity is nowadays. And this is how I planned my life. My life, I was like, I don't want a destination. I want a journey where I'm walking at a slower pace because I'm not trying to get my butt up this mountain. So I'm able to enjoy more of my life now. And I'm trying to structure my life and shepherd my clients to do the same as more of a journey on a continuum rather than I have to get to retirement and then I'll have joy. And some of that for me comes from, my mom died when she was 49. I was 21. Last month, my sister died of cancer and she was 50. And all these types of things, you realize, if you march up that mountain towards retirement and buy into sacrifice, you might miss out on your life. So there's a balance in there, and you don't want to go too far the other direction, but I think defining it as this number that you have to hit really can suck a lot of joy out of your life because all that stress and pressure of trying to get to that point.
Yeah, I like the point there that you're making as far as having balance in your life. You're not the extreme saving and sacrificing everything right now in order to reach this far off goal that you may or may not even reach. None of us are promised tomorrow, but I think finding that good balance. Maybe you're not maybe extreme saving, but you're also not spending everything that you have on things you don't need right now. Because when you're doing that, you're sacrificing things down the road as well. So finding a good balance of living now and then making those small decisions like you're talking about, getting that emergency fund, finding ways to increase your income, all those things. Finding balance, that's key for me.
And I think we were talking about the balance sheet and saving towards retirement or to older age, because we do have to think about those things. The number one thing that people can do is have a process of little check-ins on your cash flow and your net worth statement. So the little story I always tell is I always ask people what the key to a good marriage is. Okay, I'm not on the panel. I don't know who's married for how long, but I'm the oldest, so I'm guessing I'm the longest married. And I've been married 23 years.
You better know.
No pressure.
On your next anniversary, you better have that down.
Yeah, it's coming up in October. 24, I know. But so I always ask it sort of rhetorically, and then I tell them my secret to a good marriage, and I don't practice it perfectly, but it's what I aspire to is I never want to have a big conversation with my wife. If I can avoid big conversations, I'm probably doing pretty good, because what that implies is that I'm having lots of little conversations, so anything she's upset about, I'm hearing when it's that big, not when it's that big. Because, that's the whole, example, and it really works out this way. When people get divorced, usually it's a huge conversation, or it's usually a huge issue that has grown. It could have been as simple, as the toilet seat being left up, that nobody ever addressed, and the resentment and just builds and builds and builds until nobody understands what it's about. And the quicker you deal with any issues in your marriage, just like your financial life, the more flexibility you have to make decisions and make sure that everything is aligned. So when you think about your cash flow or your balance sheet or insurance or your estate plan, the key to everything is forget trying to plan 30, 40 years out into the future. That's not productive. Instead, accept that the future is unknowable. The markets are unknowable. Trust me, your life is totally unknowable. You do not have control over your life. You have some influence over it, but good things happen, bad things happen. You get it. You're on a path and you sort of can control the directions, but life will hit you in good and bad ways. So rather than try to figure all these things out and spend so much time on assumptions, just accept that it's totally unknowable. And that's a really good position because it's true, right? It's totally unknowable, everything. So when you accept that, now the issue before the house becomes, how do you build a framework for managing that uncertainty? And in my world, what I work to do is I just have lots of little conversations. So once a month I have a little conversation about cash flow. Once every 6 months I have a little conversation about my net worth statement. Once every year I have a little conversation about insurance. Once every 2 years I have a little conversation about my estate plan. And then I just keep repeating those and repeating those and repeating those. So I'll just sort of meander my way there, making sure I have those check-ins with my checklist for each one of those conversations, and the rest, everything else will take care of itself. And that is going to give you the most flexibility to make smarter decisions and to be prepared for what happens. Because where big financial problems happen with people is when they just sort of stick their head in the sand and then they wake up and they're $100,000 in debt, or they've spent their nest egg and they didn't even realize it.
I think that goes along really well with Lance's question that he asked on Facebook, about, how to make it happen when this thing is happening 40 years in the future. I really like how you bring it back to today and say, well, you need to focus on how it all works together, how it all meshes together in your overall desire for lifestyle. And I think we've brought it up too in that the old traditional idea of retirement is pretty much dead for most people, of, Gen X and Gen Y. For most of us, the idea that we're going to work till we're 65 and then just like sit around and play golf or whatever is not even desirable to many of us. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe Kyle wants to sit around and play golf all day. I don't know. But many of us, that's not even desirable. So planning for this 40-year event that takes place where we sit around for 30 years after that just does not seem practical from this standpoint. And really, it's more about saying, well, let's do life as a whole. And I like that you've said that.
Brandon, you are spot on, because here's the secret, is with all the clients that we work with that are boomers that are in that stage and retired, I got maybe 2 that don't work. They all end up, I had a meeting the other day with a 76-year-old retired doctor who works 3 days a week. He can't help himself. And because he has something to give and it keeps him intellectually engaged. And that is the big fallacy, is that when you retire, you're bored. So what ends up happening is either you go volunteer or you go work and make a lot of income, or shopping becomes your hobby. So for people that are younger, that's the secret. If you truly accept that that is not how I'm going to live, think of all the creative possibilities in terms of managing your financial life if you reject that traditional sense. If you can do that early, that buys you a lot of lifestyle.
Right.
Doesn't mean you don't have to save, but then you can balance better.
Right. Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that the Institute of Economic Affairs in the UK not too long ago, last year or the year before, released a study that found that people who retired and just stopped working altogether and didn't have anything to do, their health went downhill, mental and physical, because they didn't have that engagement. And so I think part of retirement planning has to include quality of life and what you expect to happen during those years, a shift in the way you want to do things, and not necessarily stop working and just stop life,
And I'm going to guarantee that these are the 2 best investments you can make for your financial future in retirement. And nobody's allowed to say guarantee. So don't record that. It's invest in your health, because healthcare costs are outrageous, especially if you're unhealthy. And invest in your relationships, because the biggest financial mistake you can make is to get divorced when you're 55 or 60.
I think that's great advice.
That is awesome.
Although in Canada, we not have to worry about the health care costs as much.
Yeah, we can be unhealthy as we want here.
Yeah, there's not just quantitative return, but there's qualitative return.
Right.
We mentioned Social Security. Is that something that we should even play into this conversation? Is it just maybe icing on the cake, or is it something realistic that we can kind of plan for?
Oh, in terms of counting on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Social Security is actually very easily fixed when you look at it. It's just the political will to do it. If you're under 40, the way I would think about Social Security is it's not going to go away, but it's probably going to, at some point, get more means tested. Meaning it's going to get taxable, or it's going to go down based on your net worth or your cash flow or your income. So that's the way I would look at Social Security, is that more than likely at some point it may get means tested, but I doubt that very much is going to go away. And I think that if they did some means testing in some way, that would solve it pretty quickly.
There's a lot of talk here in Canada, too, about our Canada pension plan, whether it'll be around however long from now, but I'm sure it'll always be around. Here, the maximum you get from Canada pension plan is over $1,000. That's the maximum, granted. And then there's a old age security payment of over $500. So, and this is per person, so you can easily have like maybe $1,000 a month per person back from the government. So that it's, at least in Canada, it's a big portion of what you got to factor in when you're looking at your actual amount you do need for retirement.
Yeah, and those dollars help.
Extra money always helps anywhere. So as we're as we're maybe approaching retiring age or even before, how do we start to plan for things like healthcare and insurance, like long-term care insurance? How do those play in? Is that something that we should be thinking about like from day one as early as possible? Or, I mean, you say obviously we all should invest in our health because the healthier you are, the less you need these things. But I mean, that's the ideal. It's not the reality.
Well, you want to talk specifically about long-term care?
Sure. Is that something that we should be considering?
I don't have an answer for that. I'm really perplexed on long-term care. So this is how we approach it, because it's a huge question. And, you hear the statistics that you read in all the articles. They're really scary. I mean, you're screwed if you have Alzheimer's and you don't have a lot of money, because it's like $4,500 a month for a memory care facility. And the inflation rates on those are significant. And
right. And they say that, 85% of people are going to spend some time in a long-term care facility at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's behind that number. That seems, but let's look at how do you solve for that? Okay, so you're a 60-year-old person. So obviously, if you're under 40 or 50, it's not viable to buy. Here's the problem that we found with long-term care, and I don't know the solution for this. I don't have a solution, but the problem I find with long-term care policies is that nobody knows what's going to happen with them, because the claims experience of all of the insurers is so small relative to what's coming because of the baby boomers, right? They're not in that bubble hasn't gotten to that point of claims history yet. And just this last year or so, the major policy issuers had premium increases, in some instances over 40%. So think about that. And we've had to triage some individuals that had long-term care policies. So you're an individual, you're paying whether it's $2,000 to $5,000 a year for long-term care insurance. And let's say you were prudent and you did that, you started when you're 58 or so. In one instance, this person had been paying into their long-term care for 10 years. They've been faithfully making their, say, $5,000 a year payment for 10 years. And then, so now they're 68 to 70, and they just got a 45% increase in their premium. So they have no earnings power. They've been paying into this policy. Now their $5,000 premium goes up to $7,500, say. Now what do? You pay the $7,500? That's cost your lifestyle, right? That's more draw on the assets you've had. And you're not assured that won't go up again next year or the year after. Or the other option is typically, do you pay the same premium and you lower the benefits that you receive? Well, that sort of sucks because you've been paying for those benefits for 10 years. So what do you do? And our biggest fear when we look at it is we ain't seen nothing yet, because the claims of these baby boomers haven't even really begun. And the insurance agencies really don't know what to expect because this is uncharted territory. So I have a really hard time telling somebody to buy long-term care insurance, but I don't have any solution. But that's
start saving a lot more money.
Save $2 million in a nest egg.
Yeah. The people that can really afford to buy it can probably self-insure, and the people that couldn't afford it anyway can't afford it anyway. And then the people in the middle, that are between, say, and it's hard to say numbers, but $500,000 to $1.5 million, they can probably afford the premiums, but that's still, you're paying $5,000 a year now, and the prospect of that premium could continue to increase for something you may never use. That gets harder and harder to do. So I'm really afraid that a lot of people are going to buy these things, and we're going to have some crazy premium increases, and they're going to pay for them 10 years and then finally give them up right when they probably need it most. So I don't really know the answer to that.
That's pretty scary. I mean, because even the subject of the long-term care is scary. I mean, I've heard the horror stories where you're going along fine in retirement, then something happens, you break that hip or whatever happens, and now you're in long-term care, and it just bleeds your finances, and you don't get to use Medicare until all your finances are bled. So it's either you use up all your money doing that, or
Yeah, well, and Medicare doesn't cover long-term care.
right. But I mean, the care, whatever care that you need, whatever it is that you're paying for.
Or become a Canadian citizen. Just saying.
I have another fantastic investment.
All right, retire to Canada.
I have another fantastic investment for long-term care, especially if you're younger. Raise very strong, successful, independent children.
That love you.
Yeah, I love you. Yeah.
Not too
that's
strong.
key.
Not too independent.
Well, my grandmother recently passed, and my parents and aunts and uncles, took turns for several months helping her out, and then they were able to have hospice care come in to the house and take care of her at home. And so that was nice to be able to have that option, so she didn't have to go to a long-term care facility, but still have that care. So I think, cultivating those goes back to your thing, cultivating those relationships.
Yeah, which is the traditional way things were done before we had social safety networks. And one of the bigger issues with long-term care, when I talk with couples, is they're not worried about themselves. They're worried about draining the assets for their spouse. That's really the big issue. More than likely, most families will, not more than likely, but you can struggle to get, either a combination of home care and in-home care and family coming together. The real scary part, the fear that I hear from most people is, I don't want to drain my assets and leave my spouse with nothing.
Yeah. So I think really quick, before we wrap up, I want to try something fun here, on a higher note there, or a more fun note.
Sorry, I'm such a Debbie Downer.
No, these are realistic things that happen, and I think a lot of people don't want to look at these issues, and they try to avoid them until they happen, and then they're not prepared for them. But money aside, if you could retire anywhere, where would you go?
You asking me?
Anyone.
Canada now, I guess. No.
I say the opposite. I'd probably go somewhere warmer, actually. I just remain a Canadian.
We have to go back to Canada every 6 months, though.
Yeah, the summer. That's what we do. We go to Phoenix.
Yeah,
I'd like to
right where I
travel.
am now at my lake, just getting a much better internet connection.
I think
I don't want to retire to one. That's my answer right now. Travel. I'm not sure I want to stay in one place. Take some time to live in some different places all over the
That's a great idea, Peter.
Yeah, I like that.
That's good.
Mine is, I want to, and I'm trying to sell this to my wife because I have my son's going off to college and my daughter's a junior, and we live in the burbs like a lot of people, and I'm trying to sell her that we're going to sell the house and move to downtown Fort Worth and have a small townhome, much smaller footprint, and then because of the way my work is structured, then I'll go live in Santa Monica for 6-7 months, or I'll go live in different destinations and sort of float to different areas and have a smaller footprint cash flow wise where I'm at, so I can sort of enjoy. But I don't know if right now I'm not winning that battle on leaving the house, so that's why I'm planting the seed early.
See, I was going to ask, when you move, are you going to tell the kids where you're going? So I think we've gone over retirement pretty well here, and it's really refreshing to hear what Roger's saying, how it's not just a number that you're going to shoot for, but really you have to look at your lifestyle now. What I'd like to do before I wrap up is maybe just get a final word from everyone on what they think about saving for retirement and how much they might need. I think maybe some of what we would normally think, maybe it was swayed by what Roger said. I guess we'll see. So let's go around and just see what everybody has to say about saving for retirement. Let's start with Miranda.
Yeah, so I think a really good approach is to look at it in terms of building up what you're going to need for monthly cash flow rather than trying to aim for this huge number. Is take a look at, building up different income streams and figuring out how you can manage that cash flow. as Roger was talking about a little bit. That's my big thing. I've got my dividend portfolio that I'm working on, building up so that when I get to that point, I'll have income from that. Of course, I've got my freelance writing business, and then along with Tom, we're trying so hard for my websites to make money, but eventually, having those multiple income streams, I think, is more important than having a massive nest egg.
And Kyle, what's your final word?
One of these little decisions that Roger was talking about, to me, is making sure you maximize your defined contribution plans from a young age, if you're fortunate enough to have them, whether that's in a 401k or Roth, or in Canada, if you're looking at an RSP or TFSA. For goodness sake, take advantage of that. Because the problem is, myself as a teacher, I find all these people that have not taken advantage of it, and then they're quite jealous of me, and they're angry with me, and I realize that I'm quite fortunate to have a defined benefit plan, but don't get angry with me, just get even with me.
Nice. And Peter, your final word.
All right. Well, my final word is just to start paying attention to your finances. I mean, it really comes down to what Roger was saying, looking at those smaller decisions in your life and actually paying attention to your cash flow. Over half of workers age 45 and older haven't even tried to calculate how much money they're going to need in retirement. And that's a huge number. So start thinking about it. Start planning ahead, thinking about those short and long-term goals and medium-term goals as well. Start saving and have that balance in your life so you're still living a little bit right now, but don't go to the extremes.
And Tom, your final word?
A lot of people start to think about all the traveling they want to do and everything, and they start to think, I need this huge amount of money. But one thing we never mentioned was keep in mind what you're not going to have when you retire. Like by then you've got your house paid off. Hopefully you're not stuck in a big car loan or anything like that. You don't have expenses to get to and from work. So some of that plays in, and you might not actually need as much money as you think you need on an annual basis.
And Roger, we'll finish with you if you wouldn't mind giving us a final word on saving for retirement and how much we need.
Well, I think it's a lot of what we talked about. I think accept that you're going to work longer than what the normal process tells you. And if you accept that, and then you can get a lot more creative in how you manage your financial life. And don't look at it as an investment problem or a savings problem. Look at it as making lots of small decisions to position yourself in all areas of your financial life. And I think the earlier you do that and realize it's not an investment problem and you're going to work a lot longer, the more creative you can get in designing and structuring your life to serve you rather than, and that's going to relieve a lot of stress and actually allow you to be empowered to actually do some of these small conversations rather than just saying it's such a huge problem, I might as well forget about it.
Roger, thanks so much for taking the time out to join us tonight. I really loved hearing about your aspects of how we're supposed to look at retirement as a whole. For those that are out there that want to know a little bit more about the Retirement Answer Man, what's that all about, and what should we expect from you?
The Retirement Answer Man is at rogerwhitney.com, and I use it as my laboratory to be a better advisor and hone my craft. So I blog 2 to 3 times a week. It's all driven by my podcast, Plan Well, Invest Wisely, where I take all the stories and the lessons that I've learned from all the situations that I deal with and try to create actionable ways to think about how to make smarter financial decisions. And it's, I spent a year and a half figuring out what my calling in my life is for the next 10 or 15 years, and this is it. And it's focused mainly on, it's called Retirement Answer Man, but it's really about what we've talked about today, making a lot of smart financial decisions and different ways to think about all these different areas in our life.
Thanks again, Roger. And thank you everybody out there that has watched us. Please make sure you check in at moneymastermindshow.com for our show notes. I think we'll try to get Roger's checklist on there if he'll share that with us. This way you can see if you're looking for a financial planner what to ask them. And make sure that you are checking in with us in iTunes and in Stitcher as well. Make sure you get these podcasts and shows sent to you for free. Subscribe. And we love to hear comments as well. So if you want to leave a review, you want to come to our site and leave a comment once we put our episodes up. If you have any follow-up questions, please do that because we really love hearing from our audience. And thanks again for joining us at the Money Mastermind Show. Until next week, be good with your money. Good night.
Thanks for joining us on the Money Mastermind Show. Get more information at moneymastermindshow.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Google+.